Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Object Storage, what it is and how it can help you manage ever-expanding data. Today's event is brought to you by Quest and produced by ActualTech Media. Thank you for joining us on today's special webinar event. My name is David Davis of ActualTech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's presentation. Before we kick it off and I introduce you to our expert presenter, I want to first remind everyone that we want this to be an educational event. So we encourage you to use the questions box there in your audience console. Of course, we appreciate all the good morning and hello messages, but we also even more, but particularly appreciate questions about today's topic on object storage. So I can highlight or call your attention there to the questions tab. And we will be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So make sure you get your questions in early. We also have a number of handouts there in the handouts tab, specifically the Core Store free trial link. You can click on that to get a free trial of the Quest Core Store product that we'll be talking about in today's presentation. And there's also a Quest Cloud tiering white paper that you want to check out, which has additional information on today's topic. We'll also be announcing the winner of an Amazon $300 gift card at the end of today's live presentation. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found in the handouts tab in your audience console. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. That is Mr. Adrian Moir, who is a senior consultant for product management at Quest. Adrian, thank you for being on the event.
It's great to be here, David. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Excellent. Well, before Adrian kicks off his presentation, I have just a little bit of keynote presentation here that I want to chat with everyone about, do a little bit of stage setting on the topic of data protection. So before we get started, just wanted to talk for a moment about the requirements for modern data protection. From the polling that I've done of IT professionals on the many events that we run here at ActualTech Media, and simply from the popularity of our data protection and disaster recovery events, it's obvious that most companies and most IT professionals out there simply aren't satisfied with their current data protection solution, and they're looking for ways to improve it. They're looking for ways to modernize it, make it better, faster, more secure, more efficient, less babysitting, as they say. Just make it work. And so many companies are faced with that challenge, I feel. And so I've compiled here just a brief list of what I feel like are the requirements for the next generation and the more modern, more innovative data protection solution of tomorrow. And the first one is simply the need for speed. I mean, in today's world, application downtime and data loss is simply not acceptable. And when a company needs to recover their data, it has to be done quickly in order to get critical company applications up and running as fast as possible. And for that reason, the need for speed and high performance is really tops on my list. Another one is scalability. Traditional data protection solutions really struggle with recovery times as the data set grows. And with ever increasing demands for data storage from massively growing data sets, the next data protection solution that IT organizations choose really has to be able to scale sort of infinitely without performance degradation. And then with ransomware really targeting companies of all sizes, the backup repository must be secure, and it must be immutable, ideally from modification and from ransomware. And so I encourage everyone to look for solutions that can highly protect your data to a high degree, and make sure that should you need to restore your data, especially in a ransomware situation, you can get that data back quickly, and that you're following, of course, the 3-2-1 rule to have multiple copies of your data with at least one of those copies offsite. And then, with all that being said, since data protection is to some degree an insurance policy, if you will, any investments in data protection must be closely tied to the value that you're getting back from that. So, you want to make sure that the cost is reasonable for the value that's being gained. And that's something that Adrian and I will be discussing more during this webinar. And to sum up my list of requirements for your next data protection solution, I would encourage you to look for short data retrieval times. You need to get that data back fast, high performance, high scalable, very secure, and one I didn't mention previously, which is intelligently leveraging public cloud. There's a lot of data protection solutions out there that will help you put your data in the cloud, and that's great because cloud can be very beneficial, but you also have to do it intelligently because, as you know, whatever you put in the public cloud, you're going to be paying, per megabyte or gigabyte or, whatever the cost model is. So the more you use it, the more you consume, the more you're going to pay. So you want to make sure that you do that intelligently. And then finally, you want to make sure that you focus on an affordable solution. And really, you know, you have to try to get the best of both worlds when it comes to data protection between the low price of cloud storage and the price of the solution while still achieving all of these traits and requirements, including short data retrieval times. So the key to doing that is to have the right architecture in place the first time. And that's why I'm excited to have Adrian on today's event because he's really an expert in this topic and he's going to help educate us on what object storage is, why object storage helps us to achieve the best of both worlds scenario that we're talking about, and what makes the core store architecture unique in the industry. So with that, Adrian, great to have you. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. What a great introduction. Thanks, David. So I'm going to roll back a little bit first on all the great points you brought up around the data protection piece, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the object storage piece. Now, object storage is not new; it's been around quite a while, and kind of interestingly, it was the storage of choice that was moderately adopted by most kind of cloud-based architectures purely for its methodology, the way that you can go use it. So what's the difference between a normal kind of file structure? Well, if you look at a file structure, it's kind of based on how we used to do things in an old office with a filing cabinet with folders. You put files inside the folders and you can go and search for them. And if you consider it, if you think about having a large amount of those files and folders, and if you think of them sitting in a warehouse, you get to a point where you fill the warehouse up and you don't have anywhere to go, so you then have to go and buy and build another expensive warehouse sat next to it to go and continue on in the same way. If you kind of use that same analogy with object storage, you kind of get rid of the file structure, so the folders disappear. So we have something, for a good example of this, a great word I like to use this. If you look at the Amazon S3 piece, they give you the ability to create a bucket. It's basically you're going to put all of your information into this bucket. So it doesn't have the same kind of structure. However, if we go back to our warehouse, if you then compare the two warehouses, the warehouse that has object storage has the same kind of outer boundaries, but it doesn't have a roof anymore. And that's one of the main considerations about object storage. Nominally speaking, it's kind of limitless in terms of what you can deliver with scale. So where a traditional file system would have an upper limit with the number of files you'd have and maybe the file types and sizes that you'd be able to put in there, object storage kind of gets a way around that. And it stores the data in a kind of a different way, gives you something a little bit different. So while it stores the data, which is fine, that would be as an object, you can wrap around metadata associated with that object. So you can put in all sorts of information around there. And then there'll be a key associated with that as well. So a unique key that allows you to actually find that information. Now, the difference being is that when you look through a file structure that's in a traditional kind of makeup with files and folders, very limited ways of searching through that. You can look at the file name, maybe if you look at the last modified date, or it kind of gets a little bit different and difficult to find potentially when you're looking at millions of files. when you look at an object storage piece, you can search on the metadata that you may have put in, or metadata that's been pulled out of the file and populated, or you can search for the key. So finding the information you want over a large amount of data becomes an awful lot easier and an awful lot faster. So this allows us to think of things in a slightly different way when we want to address the data we have to get at. And this is where it kind of starts to key in pretty well, if you pardon the use of the pun there, key into data protection, because you're going to have a lot of data and you're going to want to be able to get to that data, as David was saying earlier, as quick as you can and find the data you need, get the data back. And when we're talking about petabytes of data, and we have customers with tens and hundreds of petabytes worth of data, finding what you want back quickly becomes a bit of a challenge. And this is where we kind of make a little bit of a step change when we think about a methodology of utilizing an object storage kind of delivered mechanism. And if I go and look at what we do with our product called Core Store, the deduplication, it's very similar in terms of how we store the data to a traditional object storage model. We would take a stream of incoming backup data, we would chop that up based on how we match the data we already have stored. So you get the variable deduplication window that we all want to kind of go and find. And we end up with a chunk of data. Now we have to store that data somewhere in such a way that it's efficient for us to be able to go and get it again to rebuild the data set we want to recover. So we can wrap our own kind of metadata around that and also apply a location to where that data is stored. So instead of us having to work out which bits are where, which belong to which stream, and we can actually go and find and use the metadata associated with that, search for that, build out the stream, go and collect the objects from these locations. So you're no longer searching through file structures and file systems and doing the kind of walkthrough searches to get that information back. So it changes the fundamental way that we actually approach the aggregation of data for things like recovery. And it allows us to take advantage of deduplication, but actually looking at it from an easier and faster way of recovering the data sets using the algorithms to rebuild it again. So rather than sitting there with a huge, great big database full of file names and file structures, we actually have just what we call a metadata database that we can actually go and look up and find the location of the chunks that we need, bolt them back together and reinflate the data. So it actually speeds the process up a lot. And when you look at these two kind of constructs between the object storage and the way that we work with our deduplication technology, you can see they're very, very similar in the kind of construct, which then gives us the kind of the innate ability to go and start thinking, okay, well, instead of using spinning disk for our deduplication technology that we've been doing for so many years, what would happen if we go and leverage object storage instead? Where does that take us? And that's kind of the next step forward that we would need to take to scale out large amounts of data and store them efficiently at a lower cost, but also still maintain the ability to retrieve them more efficiently as well. So let's have a look about what we can do with the Core Store technology. What is it all about? Lots of people say to me, what is Core Store? Can you explain this to me? So Core Store is kind of unique in the industry in as much as it is a deduplication solution. It has a 10-year R&D effort into this. So it's a very mature product technology. But it's a software layer. You can apply this technology to pretty much anywhere you want to. So you can install it on hardware, you can install it in a virtual machine, you can run it in cloud. So it kind of breaks the mold a little bit around traditional deduplication solutions, and it's no slouch either. So on average, we see 21 deduplication. Those are kind of real world figures. I've seen larger, I've seen less. So I will show you some. I've got a UI screenshot, so you can see what that kind of looks like. We have some protocol accelerators as well, which we can talk about a little bit later. Can drive up to 20 terabytes an hour throughput, so it's no slouch. It will move the data as fast as you can push it to it. If we then look at the utilization of these technologies, we need to be kind of a bit more agnostic in terms of backup platform as well. I mean, Core Store supports 13 different backup technologies. And doing this kind of stuff at a storage layer makes you a lot easier to translate and move around if you wanted to go and change your backup application for whatever reason it happens to be. Having an agnostic storage layer means you don't get tied into the storage mechanisms of that particular backup software vendor. So it enables you to actually change with less impact to the business and keep the processes that you've got in place going forward as well. Unique protocol accelerators, we can deliver source-side deduplication with CoreStore over open protocols like SMB and NFS. We support the Veritas OST. We support our own technology for our in-house backup products, which is called RDA. So we have a methodology of actually accelerating data sets by reducing the amount of data you push over a wire. Now that's important to one point of actually getting things done quickly, but it also means it doesn't flood the interfaces at the storage node, which means you can run more backup jobs, which means you can increase your throughput. That need for speed thing starts to come up again. So you can actually do more in the same amount of time. Other things that people start to demand of these kind of modern storage structures for backup and recovery, being able to make secondary copies. David mentioned the 3-2-1 rule, so remote site replication. Where do I want to replicate my data sets to? An alternate data center, a colo, into cloud if you want to. So you've got a secondary copy of the data that the backup application understands directly. And of course, during all of this, we like to have the kind of the security thing as well. So we encrypt that data replication in flight. We also encrypt at rest as well. We actually have 2 layers of encryption available. There's a standard AES 256-bit. And then on top of that, if you want to super encipher things, we actually have a rolling technology, which actually has a patent. It uses a unique block of data, gives you a no knowledge encryption layer sat on top of that. And you can change that, say, every 7 days. So every 7 days, the data set being written is encrypted differently to the previous 7, and so on and so on. So it becomes very hard to break things open. We have a level of multi-tenancy technology inside CoreStore as well. So you can segregate data sets if you don't want intrusion over deduplication from one customer's data set to another customer's data set. If you're an MSP and you're looking to actually provide a level of multi-tenancy, but without actually having to go and install lots of different installations, well, we can help out with that too. And along with that in-flight encryption, we have another element which we call our Secure Connect technology. So this is where that in-flight encryption sits, but also we have a level of reconnect as well. So we have a resilient methodology of moving our data packets around, and we can suffer anything up to about a 10-minute timeout before we have to start again. So for the high latency links, or those links that keep hopping up and down a little bit, we can make that a bit more secure in terms of getting the data over. Now we get into some of the interesting stuff, certainly around the cloud tier technology when we start to think about that kind of object storage piece. And we look at the kind of moving data set based on a policy. So the policy around cloud tiering you can set within CoreStore becomes agnostic to the backup application. It doesn't need to know about it. So it's very, very simple and transparent. We look at the data set. Has it been active for so many days? And we set a timeline. How long do you want to keep this data locally for? So what we do is we actually copy the data out from your local instance out to cloud storage. And that could be AWS or Azure. It could be an attached S3 device if you wanted to go and use some of the local storage. You can do that. Any other S3 based connectivity. We're adding Google Cloud support in version 7 as well. So you can actually send the data out based on an aging policy. And say if you set your policies, say I don't need the data locally after 30 days. What we do is we then clean up the local storage after 30 days and maintain the data out in cloud for you. And what's kind of interesting using the cloud tier piece, when David mentioned about the speed of recovery, when you want to recover something, we go and look at the local data map first to see if there are any chunks of data we can actually rebuild with. So we do that first before we go and grab any kind of chunks that we have stored out in cloud. So it reduces the cost of actually egressing data out of cloud by actually using the localized data sets to build from first from that deduplication map, and then we can serve that data out. That also has the innate ability to actually give you a faster time to that first byte set back to your backup application. So it's not spinning there for hours on end. We can start pulling the data back. And it's seamless to the backup application. It doesn't know it's happening. We deal with all of that underneath. and then we stream the relevant blocks that we need out of cloud to formulate the data as they're required. So it actually reduces the wait time and it reduces the egress cost as well. Now, the performance tier. One of the things that was labored about, the need for speed. Everybody wants things to come back quickly. Now, interestingly, one of the technologies that's grown over the last few years is the ability to recover virtual machines, the instant boot, the instant recover. I want to, spin this machine up from my backup storage and I want to do a vMotion and get it over there. Well, that's kind of very interesting technology, and it's been driving the industry to do things in a better way. Now, traditionally in deduplication solutions, that kind of mechanism was a bit of a no-no because of the fact that you had to rebuild everything, rehydrate everything, and doing blocks on demand become very, very hard. Now, I'd like to say right now, we've kind of resolved that. Inside CoreStore, you can create what we call a performance tier. You can mount a file system that might be on a different set of disks, maybe SSD, for example, and utilize that, store your really important stuff, your backups, into that performance tier. Now, while SSDs help, we also have a cache-based algorithm technology that sits in there as well. So there's a little bit of secret sauce that allows us to actually think this stuff's kind of important, but it does mean that you can now do instant boot of virtual machines without actually having to compromise on deduplication across your storage. So you don't have to have the big fat disks sat there that are idle doing nothing most of the time until you're actually writing to them or reading from them. But now you can actually compress your data, make the best use of your cost around associated disks without suffering any kind of performance loss when you want to do the instant boot stuff. So it's pretty neat technology. And then we kind of get into the meat of what we're kind of talking about today: object direct and archive tier, two extra technologies that we're adding into our next version 7, which is due in a few weeks' time. Object direct is the ability to actually use object-based storage instead of spinning disks behind a deduplication solution. This is relatively revolutionary in terms if you think about the agnostic nature of CoreStore, writing from 13 different backup solutions. You could actually write that data using one of our protocol accelerators up to a cloud instance, and then go and use object storage in cloud for the main repository of that deduplication solution. So if you think about the cost change we have here, when you start to reduce it down, you get down to 1 or 2 cents per gigabyte in terms of cost of using that cloud storage. So deduplicated, compressed, encrypted, stored in object storage, which has essentially a limitless capability. Now, I'm going to cap that. We do have some size constraints around CoreStore, but this new element allows us to start thinking about removing the caps as data sets start to grow. Now, the archive tier, we had lots of requests from our existing customers around CoreStore that wanted to be able to have the ability to go straight to an archive-based tier. I want to go straight to Amazon Glacier, for example. I don't want to hop in between. I don't want to store it any other way. I know I'm not going to access this for maybe a couple of years. I want it in the cheapest, slowest possible storage, and I want to put it out there. So we've added that in too. So if you want to go direct to Glacier with some of your data sets, that's fine. You can go and do that. The recovery time is going to be slower. It's going to be cheaper though. And don't forget, we're going to compress and dedupe it before it actually leaves the CoreStore instance and goes out to something like Glacier. So when you kind of round all of this stuff up, you get into saves you money, reduces your storage, and completes your strategy too.
Really cool stuff, Adrian. We do have a lot of good questions coming in. I want to just pause here for a second, if you don't mind, and let's see if we can take some of these questions. So, first one we should probably clear up is this a hardware solution that Quest is offering or a software solution?
It is a software solution. You can put it on any hardware that meets the requirements. So whatever your favorite brand is, you go knock yourself out and do that. Um, One of the key things about this is that if you think about a hardware-based solution at the end of 3 years, when you come to think, oh, okay, I've got to change my hardware, it's got that 3-year itch or that 5-year itch, you have to rebuy the whole thing all over again, including all the software. Whereas CoreStore, you get to the end of that hardware cycle, you don't have to buy the software again. You go and buy your new hardware and just move the license over. So the ROI on this becomes much more acceptable.
Got it. Okay. And can I run it in a virtual machine?
You can indeed. We actually have an optimized version as well. So, and we have an optimized version for cloud too. So if you don't need all the big stuff, you can run it in a smaller environment inside a virtual machine. You can run it full scale inside a virtual machine too. If you want it nice and easy, we have OVAs for Hyper-V and VMware. If you want to do the whole install yourself, well, then you can do that too.
Nice, nice. Okay. And then, so does this replace my existing backup application or does it augment it?
It's an augment. So, for example, if you're using Veeam, it's a Veeam certified ready technology. We actually have some integration pieces with Veeam around the protocol accelerators. We also support their uh, synthetic full technology too. So, unlike other kind of technologies that are kind of deduplication not so aware when you're talking with Veeam, when you kind of do the synthetic full, there's a lot of read write going on and it kind of hammers away. We actually support their synthetic methodology directly, and that allows us to actually do all the synthetic backup pieces at the storage layer. So it's very, very quick.
Nice, nice. Okay. And then I know you talked about, object storage in cloud. For example, everybody's
Mhm.
heard of, say, Amazon S3. Does this replace S3? Is this an alternative to it, or does it still leverage S3 to store the data, or how does that work?
I was going to come to that a little bit later, but we can answer that now. So with version 7, we will have an S3 connector at the front end as well. So if people have a technology that writes out to an S3 based storage solution, where they were thinking that with going directly to cloud, or if you wanted locally, if you've got a solution that writes out to that, you can do it that way too. So we can actually have kind of the whole object-based workflow from front end to back end. So yes, you could use it to replace object storage if you want to not use cloud and still do an object storage thing on-prem. Sure, go right ahead. It doesn't. I wouldn't say it's a replacement for AWS in terms of scale and size, unless you think you've got a data center that can match AWS, then go right ahead. Um, but you can certainly integrate with it, and you can use workflows where you would normally associate sending data directly to, say, an S3 bucket.
Got it. Okay. And then here's a question that came in. They're asking about the 20-to-1 deduplication ratio. Is that for all types of data? Is that an average, or what's your take on that?
It's an average. I mean, with deduplication, your mileage is going to vary, is kind of the thing we get to. Virtual machines deduplicate really, really well because you have an operating system that could well be the same across all of them. Databases with high change rate often don't deduplicate very well. The nice thing about core store is if you want to kind of not infect the really good dedupe, you can actually use that multi-tenancy piece if you wanted to separate those out. So you can be kind of sneaky about how you store your data if you so wish. I've seen we actually have one customer here in the UK that were getting 84-to-1 on their data sets, and I've seen customers only getting 10-to-1. But you're still storing 10 times the amount of data in the same kind of storage package that you would have done without it. So it does vary. It does vary on the data type. It varies on how long you keep your data as well. The longer you keep it, the more data you have to match, the better the deduplication is going to work. So the ratio is going to improve that way too.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And then here's a question kind of out of the blue from Adam. Which Marvel superhero would you most closely associate Core Store with?
Oh wow! There's where do you? I mean, you could go into Norse gods or I don't know. We'll go with Iron Man because hey, who wouldn't want to fly, right?
Okay, I like that. All right, and with that, I'll let you get back to your presentation.
All right, super. Let's move on a little bit and think about kind of the object storage kind of back end piece. So when we're kind of looking at this, if we look at this is an example as well, so no kind of limitations being shown here, but the idea is here to give you an idea. So if I wanted to go and run this in Azure or AWS, for example, there's two examples here where you want to run this. So you could spin up a small core store server, so it's effectively a virtual machine, with the deduplication engine is going to run inside there and give you all the protocol access. And we have a small amount requirement for some disks, so 4 terabytes worth. If we want to keep some metadata and block mount, we have to kind of store that somewhere. You want to get the engine to deliver that pretty quickly, because that's our search mechanism. If you think about that kind of metadata and that, that location, that's this little bit that you need to be, it's got to have some spinning disk there. However, the main bulk of your data at this point is going to be put out to object storage. Now, object storage out in cloud is an awful lot cheaper to deliver than a whole bunch of spinning disks. Now, CoreStore running out in cloud supports up to 360 terabytes worth of attached disk space. Now, that's raw disk space. Now, if you've got a 10 to 1, you're into 3.6 petabytes worth of logical storage space. If you get into 20 to 1, it starts to, you can kind of see where this is going to end up. It's quite a size. So, if I get 15 times savings, this is an example. So, I'm not even going to push it to the 20 to 1. I'm going to squeeze 22 petabytes of logical data into 150 terabytes of object storage. Now, when you consider that kind of price difference between looking at storing 2 petabytes of data as opposed to 150 terabytes of data, all of a sudden it starts to make an interesting conversation around the way you're going to store this data for longer term retention. So you start to see that popping up. Actually, yeah, it kind of gets an interesting piece at this point. So at the back end, we're looking at the data sets that are being squashed down here. So if I then kind of think about the front end of things, so we get this concept of using storage at the back end as objects. If I then look at the front end of things, we're starting to see different applications maturing, especially out in cloud. I mean, if you think about the cloud native stuff around how they want to stream data out, a lot of them will say, we're just going to send it to an S3 based storage solution. Well, that's fine. If you're then backing up or storing data that's repetitive over and over and over again, then you're going to consume storage at a very inefficient way and a very cost inefficient way as well. So this is what we wanted to add into CoreStore 7 was that new S3 front end too. So you'd be able to use the object interface and it just looks like an S3 bucket effectively. So you can create buckets within inside CoreStore, send the data in to CoreStore. It will still deduplicate it. It will still compress it. It will still encrypt it. So if you think about it from that aspect, we're kind of deduplicating cloud-based object storage, which has been a want for many people quite a while to be able to use. Now we're getting loads and tons of this data coming in. How do I put this into this really nice mechanism of using cloud storage? It's got a great use case. How can I be more and more efficient about this? So we're always being pushed towards efficiencies. So when we look at kind of the new technologies that are coming forward that are sending data sets in this kind of S3 format, using a REST-based kind of protocol to move data in and out, then it becomes a little bit more applicable to actually go and run CoreStore fully in cloud with data coming in from a cloud native app, storing it in cloud native storage. You might want to push it out to Glacier for long term as well. Again, you can still have all of the options around the kind of the tiering options into something like Glacier for archiving, or you want to tier off to an alternate cloud. If you're running this in Amazon, if you wanted to tier off your data to a different storage location, maybe Azure, you could go do that. One of our backup technologies that we also provide is a product called NetVault, and we have customers that are now running a NetVault to back up Office 365. They're running that in Azure. They're backing up the data, and then they're sending that data to a CoreStore instance that's running in AWS. So now they're becoming, to the point of saying, when you have that 3-2-1 rule, I'm even going to choose a whole different storage provider, a whole different mechanism to store my data away from where my production is. So the use of cloud is kind of changing, and those applications that are driving a different kind of data stream level, we start to address those with CoreStore 7 too.
Okay, interesting. So could this help companies to save money on their Amazon S3 bill?
Uh, for sure, if they're storing data from, if they're streaming data into it, then if they can stream it into the front of CoreStore and then go store that, sure, it'll compress, dedupe, and encrypt.
Nice, nice. And here's a question that came in. Does CoreStore interact with the data directly before it's backed up and stored?
Not before it's backed up, but in transit. So a good example is if I go and back up a virtual machine, the backup application these days, they're going to look at the block map and determine which blocks are going to be pulled out and moved. What you can do is we have a little bit of software that you can run with your backup application, and it traps that data stream going out to core store. And it takes the data set that's being streamed out, and we actually on the fly go and check to see, do we have that block stored already? If we have it stored already, we just don't send it. We just tell call store, put a pointer in, done. If we don't have the block, then we send it. So we don't actually change the data set before it's backed up. We do it during the backup process of the data stream in transit. So we're agnostic at that layer. So we don't actually have to go and interfere with any data. So the data you actually back up is the data you're going to go and store. It's just the way we actually approach the methodology of moving it and storing it.
Got it. Okay. And then there's another question that came in about can I create tiered or rule-based archival rules?
Yes, Core Store allows you to do that. So you can create a rule based on how long you want to keep it locally, how long you want to store it in cloud, and how long you want that data set to be inactive before you remove it locally. So if you say, I want this stuff not to be, if it's being used anything in the first 30 days, don't get rid of it yet because I'm still pulling data from that. And then after then, you says, okay, well, you can remove it now that you've made a copy out there. And you can change that kind of all the way down to a single day saying, it's just basically saying just copy it out to cloud and then get rid of it for me locally. So yes, you can set up those policies that are local to core store, and it will do all of that for you without you having to touch it again. It just sits there and does what it's been told to do.
Okay. And how long should someone keep their data on site before they send it to the cloud?
Oh, well, now that's a fabulous question, and that will kind of vary with what you do in your business practices. I mean, there are lots of best practices about what you want to do and what you want to keep, and how you think. How often do you do restores? How old is the data that you're restoring? What's your risk kind of profile? So there's lots of things that you kind of want to think about around that one. On a general kind of practice, the industry average is 12 weeks locally. uh, that's going to cover you for pretty much everything. More often than not, the stuff you want to recover urgently is going to be data that's probably no more than 2 weeks old. So you could say, I'll keep it locally for 12 weeks, 3 months, and then anything older than that, I can start pushing off if I so wish.
Okay. Okay. And so can this help companies to comply with the 3-2-1 rule?
Absolutely, and we're going to, yeah. I mean, you can have multiple copies of the data and storing data offsite. It's one of the drivers towards that, certainly, absolutely.
All right. Here's a question that came in from Sandeep. He's asking, do we have a gain of efficiencies when it comes to restoring the data from backup?
If you stored in cloud, definitely yes. So, and this is one of the big things around. Everyone thought, great, we'll do our backup straight to cloud, never have to worry about storage ever again until you need to restore that. And I used to say, how about what happens when you want to restore 5 terabytes from cloud? You know how long it takes you to download a DVD, right? So now imagine downloading 5 terabytes worth of data. It's going to take a while. So the efficiencies we get from storing data in cloud is that when you want to restore data from your backup application that's using Core Store, it checks the block map first. It looks at the metadata, looks at the block map and said, you're requesting this. Now I've got blocks that match maybe 80% of that locally. So I'm going to start giving you that data back first, and then for the bits, the 20% that I don't have, I can start pulling those out of cloud. So your speed efficiencies of time to first byte back to your backup application is accelerated enormously compared to just storing things natively in cloud.
Got it. Okay. All right. So should you keep two copies of the data in case of a disaster? And does this solution help me to create multiple replicas of my data?
It does, and that's a little bit in the architecture piece we'll come to in a couple of slides. So we'll answer that one
Okay.
there, I think.
Okay.
All right.
Well, then, in the meantime, why don't you show us the product? I want to see it.
You want to see what it looks like. Okay, so
Absolutely, yeah.
let's have a quick look. I did a quick screenshot for this one, so it's not overly interactive, but it gives you an idea of what the dashboard looks like. Right? So on the left-hand side, we have a menu of items you can go and select where you want to set up your containers. That's for your incoming data sets. Your localized storage, that's where you're going to store stuff. Cloud tiering, where you can set that up. Your replications, if you're looking at having more than one copy, replications is where you can go. So then the system stuff, we've got a built-in diagnostics tool as well that creates a diagnostic package you can send to support if you have problems. So that's super easy. And there's a management aspect to this as well, which we kind of haven't touched on. But when you buy CoreStore, you're given access to a free SaaS-based management tool. So if you have multiple CoreStore instances, you can actually register them in the SaaS tool and actually manage them from a single place from anywhere on the planet on any device. So if we look at what we have right here on this screen right here, um, the top left kind of panel as I would describe it, shows you the amount of data coming in. So the current bytes, that's the amount of data we've ingested into CoreStore. Now that's showing in this particular instance. Now this is in my lab, so it's a little less than real world, should we say? But it kind of gives you an idea of what we're capable of doing. I've ingested there 353.4 terabytes. I've deduplicated that down to 6 terabytes, and then I've compressed it further to 4.6. So now I've taken 353 terabytes and I'm storing it in 4.6 terabytes, which is kind of cool. And that rates us around about a 98.7% total saving. So that's a chunky old deduplication ratio going on there. Now, as I move to the top right-hand panel, this shows you the cloud connected piece. So when I've actually started my cloud tiering, depending on my policy, depends on how much data is going to move. And this policy is showing that I've actually, I'm looking at moving out of there 72 terabytes of data. Now I've taken that data and I've further deduplicated it and I've further compressed it. Now my data sets, they're probably a bunch of virtual machines, and it's done a super job of doing that. So I've taken 72 terabytes of cloud tier data and I've stored it nominally at 32.7. We have some overheads with that metadata and stuff. We store that in cloud too, just in case that your core store instance fails for whatever reason, you can go and reattach and rebuild. So there's a little overhead going out. But if you think about storing 72 terabytes of that particular data set out in cloud, and then you look at the user license cloud capacity at the bottom, I'm actually using 153.71 gigabytes to store 72 terabytes. So think of what the cost saving is associated with that. Now, the nice thing about core store around this, when we get to this point, people say, oh, well, what's included with the license? Is replication included? What can I do with this? Everything is included in the single license. There is no exceptions to any of the technology. The cloud piece, what we allow you to do, so here you can see, if you look on that top left panel, it says there's a bit there that says physical capacity, 81 terabytes. That's what you would license with CoreStore. Simple as that. How much storage have you attached, or how much storage do you want to use? In this terms, it's 80 terabytes. And then what we do is part of that CoreStore license, we say, you can go and use 3 times the amount of that storage up in cloud. So then my license for my cloud piece is 237 terabytes. So you add 237 terabytes to 81 terabytes, and I'll let you do the math. It's over 300 and something. That's my total size of addressable storage space in that CoreStore instance. And we give you that cloud tiering license absolutely free. It comes with CoreStore. So all you have to pay for is your cloud storage. That's it. Replication is the same. Replication license, you can replicate as much as you like. That's included. Encryption is also included. The 2-tier level encryption, that's included as well. Everything you can do with CoreStore in terms of technology is all included in a single license. So there's no optional extras to have to go and spend more money on.
I like
All
it. It's
right.
very nice interface there, and some incredible deduplication, ratios you're getting. So, can you kind of walk us through just briefly the deployment model? Is this, do I say I wanted to put this in a virtual machine, for
Mhm.
example, to do a proof of concept? Is there an OVA I deploy? Do I install an application in an operating system, or how does that work?
So if you wanted to do it as a virtual machine, as a proof of concept, we have an OVA. In fact, we actually have a community edition, which is 1 terabyte, used forever, no charge, just install it and just go play. So yeah, you can download that from our website and go and spin that up. If you want to have a bigger trial, certainly download the OVA again. You can attach as much storage to that virtual machine as you like, and then we can give you a trial license, and you can go and kind of fill your boots on that proof of concept. So we kind of make that really easy. We understand that people don't have a lot of time to do this kind of thing sometimes, and they want something very quick and easy to do. So that OVA methodology for Hyper-V and VMware, it's already available. Just go download it. If you want to do it out in Azure, it's in the marketplace out there too. So if you want to spin it up out there, you can do that as well.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that makes it super easy to get started and, like we said, to do a proof of concept. So
Hmm.
you said Azure it's in the marketplace. What other clouds
Yep.
is this compatible with?
As it runs in a virtual machine, I'd like to say all of them, but I'll caveat that. But yeah, you could run it pretty much anywhere. So AWS EC2 instance, you could spin it up in there. Google Cloud Platform, you could do it in there. Anywhere that you can run a machine that has the relevant amount of requirements to meet core stores needs, you're done.
Nice. Well, that's easy. And I want to just take a second to remind everyone in the handouts tab there is a link to the Core Store free trial. So you can check that out right now if you want to click on that while we're on the event and check it out afterwards. Of course, we would welcome that. All right, let's see. Really cool seeing the product in action, seeing the dashboard there, the console the UI looks very appealing, easy to use. Go ahead and tell us about the architecture.
Right. So let's have a little bit around kind of a kind of architectural deployment piece. Let's have a look at that. So we want to think about the data sets that we're going to go and back up. So we've got some servers, whether they're application servers, whether they're virtual infrastructure, and your piece of backup software that you're using. Now we have some extra little bit of technology, which we call that, RDA technology. That's a rapid data access. That's what we call that. Now this plug-in technology could be working with SMB or NFS or OST or our own in-house technology as well, which we call RDS, which is part of the RDA family. And that bit's kind of quite important as well, because that's one of the things that allows us to actually get that source side deduplication. But it's a tiny, tiny bit of software, doesn't require a reboot either. So it's very simple to go and deploy. We actually had an ESG paper done along with Veeam with CoreStore, and the guy that wrote that said hooking the two together up. I think his term was trivial. That's what he said. So it is pretty trivial to do this kind of stuff. So once we have that, if you think about the data flow coming out, you've got a core store instance. Maybe you've got this in your local data center. You're utilizing a server with some CPU, some memory, and some spinning disks. Nothing outrageous in terms of hardware requirements. It's fairly common stuff these days. Um, so we're then talking about backing up some data. Now, the quite nice thing about that, once you get into this piece, it's direct to the storage as well, straight in there. As you can see, we've got the protocols here, SMB, NFS, OST, RDS. And of course, with version 7, you'll have S3, although we won't be doing source side dedupe at that release for S3. So with the others, the local kind of stuff, it's kind of not a problem. So now you're protecting your data. You've got a copy. You have a copy of your data. It's compressed, it's deduplicated. So we've taken the data you've had in your application servers. We've used that plug-in technology to deliver source side deduplication. So we're only going to send the small amounts of data over the wire, which means we can have more throughput going on. So now I've taken this. So what about doing another copy of this data? Well, you can start thinking about how I'm going to do that. You might have a core store instance deployed somewhere else. And you might think, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, I can take advantage of some object storage perhaps that I have. Or maybe I've put this out in cloud and I'm going to use this as object storage. So this object storage at the back end of core store I would class as not so much. This would be kind of hot object storage, warm-based object storage. You want a decent in-out kind of operation availability for this. So you're running that maybe up in AWS with S3 storage behind it, that's fine. So you then actually have that ability to actually replicate the data set. So it's going to go from on-premise up to your instance running out in cloud. You've now got 2 copies of your data. You're using cheaper storage in cloud. You're still deduplicating and compressed and encrypted. In fact, when we replicate, we only replicate blocks that we need to. So again, just like the source side deduplication, we check to see what's there already, which blocks do I need to update, and that's it. And you can schedule when you do that as well. So if you don't want it to go on during working hours, you can just run it overnight and it'll play catch up. It can be encrypted in between as well, so that secure connect technology, encrypting in flight, and also the reconnect technology to get around kind of high latency stuff. You get through that piece as well. So now you think, okay, well, what about the long-term stuff? What about the archiving? What about the stuff I want to keep for 7 years, super cheap? So that's when you start getting into utilizing the colder-based object storage. That's when you start invoking the cloud tier and the archive tier mechanism. Now, we didn't talk much about the archive tier, but if you can remember back a couple of slides when I was talking about going direct to Glacier, that's what our archive tier technology delivers for you. So you could take and tier out the data. You think, I'm never going to use this, maybe once in 5 years or once in 7 years, but my regulations say I have to keep it. Again, it's still deduplicated, still compressed, still encrypted, and you just tier that out to that colder cloud storage mechanism. So now I've got multiple copies of my data sets. I've got my long-term data set as cheap and as available as I could ever make it. And of course, unlike if you're looking at something, a lot of people say to me, oh, what about tape? Tape's great. It's got its place in the world. It's fantastic. But if you've ever been in a situation where you've wanted that bit of data back and you've got the tapes back, hopefully they've brought the right tapes back for you from offsite. Hopefully the tapes work and you've got the data out. There's this long process that you've had to do before you actually get to that first byte of data back. If you think about now using cloud-based data sets, that time to first byte with a localized dedupe map and then pulling back from cloud just what you need, it's going to probably work out an awful lot cheaper than actually storing your tapes out with a third-party provider and the costs associated with that as well. And also the time to start recovering is much reduced too. So the innate architecture availability within CoreStore really kind of starts to get you to that 3-2-1 kind of element of being able to actually have multiple copies, multiple locations, and have long-term data storage, all accessible through your backup application. Everything is done under the hood with CoreStore, so it's all transparent to the user. We make it as simple as possible.
I like that. Simple. We need more
Simple.
simplicity when it comes to data protection. That's right. And really all of IT. So this could really help a lot of companies out there, I know. Let's see, lots of good questions coming in. Um, Next one I see here says, can this help me to automate the testing of my recovery?
Certainly, depending on your backup application, if you want to pull data back out again, certainly, I would always advocate people automating testing recovery. Backup software is just like every other application. It can still go wrong. I've come across many customers saying, I'm changing my backup product because when I tried to go and restore something, there was no data. So I'm a great advocate of automating testing. If the data is then available for you in this construct, you don't have to wait for the data to be made available to you before you can actually automate. The data is already there. If you have your automation piece, if your backup application goes and creates a sandbox, for example, you want to do that from, sure, absolutely. The key thing here is the data is available to you to go and do that kind of thing.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And I see from the architecture diagram, I believe I know the answer to this question already, but uh, the question is, does this run in a hybrid scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. So the core store instance you have running here, I could go and run that out in cloud, and because of the protocol accelerators and the secure connect technology, we even do that over open protocols, SMB and NFS. We actually wrap that up securely as well. So you could actually just back up directly to a core store instance running in cloud from your on-prem backup server if you so wish.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Nice.
I mean, yeah. How hybrid do you want to get? Yeah.
Right. Right. All right. Well, so we've answered a lot of questions. We've had a good chat here. I know we're starting to get low on time in today's webinar event. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to bring up this poll question for the audience. the question is, what additional information would you like about the Quest Core Store solution? And I'll just leave that up there while we do a few more questions from the audience. Adrian, I see there's a number of questions coming in. If there's any that catch your eye that you want to answer, feel free to interrupt. But let's see. Next question I was going to ask you is, this person saying they're not familiar with object storage, never used it before. Will they need training on how object storage works to use the core store solution?
Absolutely not. And that's one of the key things about Core Store. It simplifies all of that kind of process. So while you haven't had a huge amount of training around object storage, if you have the ability to go and set up an S3 bucket in AWS and get all the information to connect Core Store to that S3 bucket, that's it, you're done. So you don't have to have any in-depth knowledge or technical expertise within object storage to fully understand it. I use an S3 bucket at home to back up my local storage that I have that all the family keeps all their photos on. So it's a kind of almost a consumable item out in as as an S3 kind of connectivity piece. So if you can manage to do that bit and then hook it up with Core Store, you follow the guides we have on all that kind of stuff. That's it. You don't have to understand object storage anymore.
I like that. Okay. Next question they're asking is, what kind of policy-based management options are available with Core Store?
So Core Store looks at the data set. So you kind of get a couple of options here. So you get the ability to say how long is the data have to be inactive before I remove it from the local solution, and how long is that data going to be held on the local piece before I remove it. So there's two things that have to be satisfied. So it's not just an all or nothing kind of thing. So we have that kind of rule in place. So a good example is if you wanted to say, my overall policy is I have to keep data for 7 years. So what you can do is you set all your retention periods of your data that you're backing up for 7 years. You send that data to Core Store. Now in Core Store, you can then set a cloud policy to say, um, after 30 days, move my data. And if it hasn't been active for a week or so. So what that's going to do for you is if it's met that inactivity piece and at the end of 30 days, we've copied the data out to cloud for you. We then remove the data locally. We keep in all the information about where it is in cloud so we don't lose that. And then that reduces you then get your storage space back locally. But what's kind of nice is because you've set your retention period as saying 7 years from your backup application, that will do is when you starts to retire that data in 7 years' time, as it starts to fall out of the backup application, that will talk to Core Store and say, I don't need this data anymore. And then Core Store knows where it is, so it goes and starts removing out of cloud as well. So your full retention period is done, and your tier policy only has to have two entries in it. How long do you want that inactivity period, and how long do you want to keep it for before I move it off? And that's it. So it's super simple, but gives you quite an efficient way of actually managing that methodology.
Nice, nice. All right. Well, it looks like we've just got 1 minute left. We've got a lot of good questions. We may have to get back to a number of these after the event. We apologize for that, but it's been a really educational event with tons of questions. So we really appreciate your questions. Before we go, I do want to award the winner of the Amazon $300 gift card on the live event. That gift card is going to Tom Rule of Georgia. Congratulations, Tom Rule
Hey,
of Georgia.
well done, Tom.
And and also, I want to take a moment to remind everyone to check out the link there in the handouts tab. That will take you to the Core Store free trial. There's just a simple form right there, and you can download your trial and try out the Core Store solution for yourself. And like Adrian mentioned, there's even a community edition available that has unlimited life. It's not a timed version, so you can use it in a lab environment or for a lengthy proof of concept as well. Adrian, it's been really great having you on the event today. Thank you so much for your education on object storage.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, David, and thank you everybody for the audience and the great set of questions we've had today.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to Quest for supporting today's event. I hope everyone checks out the Core Store solution, and we'll see you on our next event. Have a great day. Bye bye.